So here we are. We're talking about sanctification and theosis. And so this is where we've been. In our first section, our first lecture that we talked about really focused on theosis and sanctification and the similarities and differences between them. And so I'm going to kind of like look at read these two definitions, which you guys can read along with me. Sanctification is the grace-empowered process by which the believer, through union with Christ and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, is restored in the image of God and transfigured into the likeness of Christ, a process that the Eastern tradition aptly names theosis. And theosis is that transformative process by which a person participates in the divine nature without becoming divine in essence. And this idea is rooted in 2 Peter 1:4, which speaks of believers as partakers of the divine nature. And so this is where in a lot of Protestant circles, a lot of Christian circles, they'll talk about sanctification as a progression towards holiness, which I think we all kind of understand. The idea of slowly living a more and more virtuous life. And where it differs from theosis is the idea that in theosis, we're kind of recognizing the fact that we have divinity within us. And lots of times people critique theosis on the grounds that it's too mystical. And so that's really kind of what we're getting at a little bit, is this notion that yes, it is mystical. We are talking about our divinization, as Katie aptly mentioned in the chat. It is kind of mystical, and we have like kind of a mystical union with God, a very close relationship with God, one of being. So then we talk about morality and the cosmos, and in our discussion after that, we just discussed a little bit about how not all religions, at least in the ancient world, were necessarily moral religions. They talked about the way the cosmos was structured, about the seasons and the cycles of the universe. And religious practice, lots of times, was all about finding humanity's role within the cosmos. And annual festivals, like New Year's festivals and harvest festivals, were kind of like a recreation of the cosmic order, these celebrations of the world as we have it. And so religion functioned in a way in which humanity participated in this constant recreation. Lots of religions saw the cosmos as being recreated every year in the cycles of the seasons, and that humanity is being a part of that recreation of that cycle of maintaining this cosmic order. And then when there's bad omens, when there's bad harvests, sometimes those were looked at disruptions of the cosmic order. And so that's where you get this idea of ritual sacrifice and some of this ritualism in ancient religions kind of being necessary for maintaining it, to ensure that we have good harvest, ensuring that we have the cycles and the seasons you know maintained, that the sun still comes up, that winter passes and we don't enter into a perpetual winter, that everything just kind of continues in its order. What does that have to do with anything? When we start getting into the Old Testament, we see that humanity's moral order is a part of this cosmic order. And when you look at the prophets like Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, whatnot, when they talk about the end of time and they talk about God's judgment, lots of times they talk about a disruption of the cosmic order. You'll see this stuff like, and the moon turned into blood and the sun was blackened, and, all these things that take place. It's kind of an unraveling of the cosmic order, an unraveling of creation. Um, and so there was this, what begins to happen is these religions start to see a unification of the moral order and the cosmic order. So we talk about theosis in the cosmos. Um, Jesus, in John 1:1, when it talks about the word and the logos and the word becoming flesh, it's recalling all of these cosmic themes. This idea of the logos is there, kind of like wisdom in the wisdom traditions. It's there kind of it's what God consults in the creation of the order. It's the wisdom and the intelligence of the divine that holds everything together. And so Christ as the Logos, comes in and is the instantiation of the whole cosmic order in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Um, Colossians, Hebrews, and John, and other parts of the Bible also all describe Christ as having this cosmic role of upholding all things by the word of his power. Ephesians, even when it discusses our struggle against sin, it describes it in terms of a cosmic struggle against these cosmic powers. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against these powers and principalities. And then Revelation depicts, all of history as this kind of cosmic drama, and it recreates it. It draws so heavily from the Old Testament and brings back like all of that same stuff from Amos and Joel and whatnot, and Isaiah and Ezekiel. All of this, the unraveling of the heavens and all these things that are happening. Again, it's like this moral judgment. It's this recreation of history, but it's this recreation of the entire world. And then finally, Romans 8 frames human redemption and the cosmic of this cosmic renewal when it says all of creation mourns and groans waiting for its day of redemption. And in that sense, you see this analogy that's frequent throughout the Bible of the idea of these birth pangs. Like the whole cosmos is like waiting to give birth to its redeemed form. And so the throes of the cosmic order, the disasters and catastrophes that we see are like birth pangs, right before the end. Theosis on the cosmos. Theosis is about reclaiming our divine nature. Um, in Genesis, 2, when it talks about, and let us make man in our own image after our own likeness, that word there, in Hebrew, it's the word selem, and in Greek, it's the word icon, and so humanity is supposed to be an extension of God's presence in the world. And that's probably the biggest thing when we talk about the Imago Dei before the fall. That's really kind of what's happening is it's like God created this world and created humanity as the stand-in, as like the steward of his created order. So we are God's presence. Garden imagery permeates the entire Old and New Testament. You'll consistently see some sort of imagery back to the garden. When you look at the creation of the tabernacle in the book of Leviticus and in Exodus, when you look at the creation of the temple, in Samuel and Kings, they're covered with all this garden imagery. And so going into the temple or into the tabernacle to worship God was seen like entering back into that primordial garden from before the fall. In that space, humanity had contact with God, walked with God, and talked with God. And so this garden imagery is this idea of returning back to its primordial intent. And then you see that in this depiction of Israel as this vine, the whole vineyard imagery. And then again in John chapter 15, when it talks about Jesus being the true vine and us being the branches, it's once again recalling this garden imagery, this return to the garden. And so it permeates all of the Old and the New Testament. Um, and in a fallen world, then Christians become reunited with God into that heavenly family. And the axis mundi, where God's presence is instantiated, becomes the Christian, or becomes the follower of Jesus. In that sense, that's where we're really getting at in the idea of theosis, is that it's kind of a recreation of the garden, in Christian worship. And then again, finally, you see this in John and also in Matthew with the Great Commission, that the divine mission is to extend God's presence into the world. And so where were we? A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Christianity at its best. Hospitals, care for strangers, care for lepers, hospices, for the elderly, orphanages, funds for the poor, burial services, funds for the redemption of slaves to pull them up out of slavery. All of this stuff was happening in the ancient world and was championed by Christians. In 313, after Constantine won his battle of the Milvian Bridge, he became the de facto emperor, and he issued something called the Edict of Milan. And this granted freedom of religion for all religions, not just Christianity. It was a move that was championed by Christians, um, but it wasn't, it wasn't just Christians. And this is kind of really significant because you don't see this anywhere in the ancient world up to this point. It's a unique thing. It was the first time any country that I'm aware of really issued a decree of freedom of religion for all peoples. And then what happens? The state started to assume the burden of care for social services. The work that the Christians was doing was so great that the empire itself decided this is a good investment of our resources. So Christian charity had such a large impact on society that the state began to subsidize Christian institutions. And this happened even, up into the European era, 17, 1800s, well after the Protestant Reformation. Christian theology of the Imago Dei sees all men as equal. And as a result of that, we have influence on the Enlightenment thinkers. You actually have an influence on just about every branch of philosophy that comes out of the West, whether it's the Enlightenment, whether it's Adam Smith, or even whether it's Marx or Hegel. They're at their underlying presence is kind of underlying assumption is this equality between all people. And this is something that comes out of this idea of the Imago Dei, that God created humanity in his image and that all of us are image bearers of God. And so this virtues of equality of all persons, humility, care for others, these become societal norms. Bart Ehrman is working on a book about to get published where he talks about this too. And he says that, the ancient world was highly stratified, but as a result of Christian influence, it's now just become part of the norm that we just kind of see the idea of like caring for other people as a thing that you ought to do. Whereas that wasn't always the case. Certainly you would care for your family, but not necessarily people that were far away from you. We have disaster relief. There's a tornado or a flood or a hurricane, and we're pulling our resources together and we're just feeling like it's a good thing to do to care for others. That's a new thing, at least in the terms of, Christian influence and what happened. The ancient world didn't really have it to that degree. Next, and this is what we did last week, is where Christianity falls short. We found that there was a strong sentiment of anti-Judaism in the early Christian movement, and that morphed into anti-Semitism. Laws that forced conversion and exile. Some of the first ones were in Spain. Even before Constantine, there were a couple of church councils, local church councils, that forbade marriage between Christians and Jews. It had certain, laws or prohibitions of Jews within the church. As a result of Constantine, and really kind of beginning with St. Augustine, we had something called just war theory, an account to really justify, imperial alignment with Christianity to justify going to war. And so I had a couple of quotes. Martin Luther and Vladimir Putin both, quote Jesus, quote John 15. No greater love has anyone than that he would give his life for his friends. And they quote this both in the context of war, which rips it completely out of its context there, where Jesus is talking about the cross and literally himself giving his life up for his friends. You see Christians more and more using this in the context of war as justifying war. Christianity in recent times has largely abandoned its egalitarian stance towards women and began to limit the role of women in history, or in ministry, sorry. Early on, women had very profound and significant roles in Christian history, in Christian ministry in the first, second, and going into the third centuries. And then slowly, it's kind of like, the church as it grew, and as its membership grew in power, as its members, as it gained members from higher strata of society, they began to kind of like reestablish some of this Roman stratification of class stratification. And so we start to see, even before Constantine, a reduction in the amount of ministries and roles and activity that women have in ministry as authority kind of shifts more towards men. Once again, as soon as Constantine comes into power and the church begins to have power, and we start to have, a state church, which begins to happen, moral values become legislated and penalties became harsher. And so, one that stood out for me is that punishment for homosexual acts included mutilation and sometimes death. Women could face death for adultery. And so it really became quite punitive. And then the Protestant Reformation kind of instigates a period of wars of religion all throughout Europe. And so these wars of religion, kind of provide the backdrop for the Enlightenment as, religious toleration, once championed by Christians, becomes really completely abandoned slowly and then just becomes awful. And so part of what was happening in the Enlightenment was kind of a reclaiming of that. It's like, can we have a society that tolerates all religions? Do we really have to fight between Catholics and Protestants? Again, what happened in the United States? Slaveholders and abolitionists both appeal to the command to love as a justification for their stance. And so that was something we talked about last week. American racism, when you look to the roots of it, it's largely seen as having Christian roots. There were theological justifications for it. And once again, as this becomes a reversal of the Imago Dei, wherein we used to see all of humanity as equals, racism begins justified by, trying to make a claim that not all of us are equals. Hate crimes against Jews, homosexuals, and minorities are on the rise in the United States. And in many cases, we talk about it, the whole no true Scotsman fallacy, as a lot of these crimes are championed by people who claimed, affinity to the Christian religion. The Ku Klux Klan claimed to be a Christian organization when it came around. And so as much as we like to say is like, they're not, this isn't necessarily Christian. A lot of the stuff is done by people who claim to be Christian or claim that they're trying to defend Christian values. More recently, church abuse has received greater public attention and scrutiny. And the unfortunate common theme in all of this is a concealment of that abuse. And this is one of the big flags that kind of inspired me to begin writing my thesis and go back to school. Was, how is it that, that so much is going on and that the church just tries to conceal it, that they don't just come clean on it? That really bothered me. Beginning in the 19th centuries, Christians began to take a political stand against social welfare. And so again, as I brought this up, just, a couple weeks ago, and then also earlier here, just a few minutes ago, is that our whole social welfare system began with Christian charity. And it was so successful that, the state began to like take hold of it and say, this is a good thing. Let's commandeer it. And so it's this weird reversal that now you start to see in Christian circles, a political stand against social welfare, the very thing that Christianity itself championed. Also, what's happening now, especially in Protestant churches here in North America, is Christians are taking a public stand against the virtue of empathy. And so I posted two books, titles of two books last week on that, a reversal of the humility that characterized early Christians. So where does this leave us? Here I'm going to go to a little bit to the Old Testament. We're going to look at Judges and First and Second Samuel all the way through Kings. And I'm looking at that because these are kind of like they tell one big story, with Judges being the prequel, and then Samuel through Kings being like this story that begins with the first king of Israel and then extends all the way into the fall of the empire. Literarily, when we look at them, it looks like that they were all kind of at least edited by the same people after the fall of the empire of the Christian monarchy. Primarily because even in Judges, even though it talks about a very early time, it uses a lot of place names that did not exist at that time, that they existed later on. And so we know at the very least, regardless of how old the story is, the story itself had been edited and compiled much later. And so it's kind of this retrospective look at where Israel came from and where it's come to. So let's look at it. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is a refrain that goes throughout the book of Judges. Um, Towards the end of the book of Judges, we see something called the story of the Levite's concubine. That's in Judges 19, and it parallels the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. And it kind of gives us this analogy that Sodom and Gomorrah, the city of Sodom was destroyed by fire. And then so it ends Judges to kind of show us a picture of Israel, that Israel itself, even with God, even with the judges, even with the miracles, even with the redemption out of Egypt, even with Moses, even with all of these leaders and everything that's going on, the people of Israel still have this heart problem that at their root, they're really no better than the nations. And that's where Judges kind of leaves us, as a reminder that you could have it the best. You could have God walking with you, but at our heart, there's something wrong there, and we're not so different. So next it says, listen to all that the people are saying you. This is God's speaking to Samuel. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as your king. So the people cry out and ask for a king to be like all the nations. And this is how Samuel begins. And this is what God tells him, is like, the people aren't rejecting you. They're rejecting me. They're rejecting having Yahweh as their king. And then it begins with this very interesting story where the Ark of the Covenant is captured and then carried off into the Philistine territory, and Israel doesn't have their ark anymore. They've lost their, symbol of God, symbol of Yahweh. What do they do? And God redeems himself, without any help from anybody. Um, God overthrows the god of the Philistines, Dagon. He inflicts them with so much plagues that they put the ark onto a cart and then they send it back. And so the setup for Samuel all the way through to the end of Kings, it begins with this idea that we need God. Israel needs God, but God does not depend on Israel one bit. God does not need Israel to save them, save him. God does not need Israel's army, or his judges or its king or anybody else. God is perfectly capable of overthrowing the entire Philistine enemy, the entire nation, all by himself without the help from a single human. So the sovereignty of God is the main thing that's being established there. And it kind of reorients our concept of what does it mean to follow God? What does it mean to do things for God? So we're not really doing anything for him that he can't do for himself. We're being invited to participate in the plans and in the power that God already has. So now we're moving on to the Imago Dei. What kind of people are we? So I looked at it somewhat through the Old Testament, and now this is the stuff that the research that I came up with in my thesis. The big one is, does everyone really do what is right in their own eyes? This guy Tappan and McKay, did a few studies, and I only cite this one, is what they found is that most people consider themselves paragons of moral virtue, yet few individuals perceive this abundance of virtue in others. And what this means is, this is how they did it, is they just kind of asked people, how moral are you? How would you rate yourself? And 90% of the people in any given subset um, would say that they are the most moral people in this room. And that's just kind of consistent. People like to consider themselves to be, morally virtuous. And then when they ask to, look at other people, they say, no, they're not as virtuous as I am, or I have a, superior moral perspective. This is mathematically impossible. And so that's the idea of moral superiority. For whatever reason, people seems to think we have this irrationally inflated idea of our own moral qualities. Regardless of how we actually act, we have something called a moral self-image, where we're preoccupied with persuading ourselves that we are moral, even when we fail to meet our own moral ideals. What does that mean? That means that even when we screw up or we make mistakes, we come up with really good excuses of why that was okay. And so we have this, this idea of the moral self-image is the way we justify ourselves even when we fail. Can we trust our own moral judgment? So this is interesting. Is In other studies, what they found out is that people are inclined to selectively apply moral rules to achieve consistency with their other values, even if those other values are prejudice and racism. People seek not only to benefit themselves, but also to persuade other people that what they're doing is morally right. Or yeah, what they are doing is morally right. What is what does all that mean? It means that when people make a decision, oftentimes it's geared by or motivated by their own self-interest. And then kind of after the fact, they're going to use some sort of moral justification for it to why whatever it is that they decided was the right thing to do. And we have a kind of an example of this in the Gospel of John, where Nicodemus is meeting with the leaders, shortly before, Passion Week, and he says, "Does our law convict a man without first hearing from him?" And so he's appealing to a deontological argument. It's like, what is the law? What is the right thing to do? What is the fundamentally right thing to do? What does the letter of the law say we ought to do? And the response they get is, look into it. You'll see that no prophet comes from Galilee. Um, they skirt the whole issue. Um, there's something interesting in this is that if you've read the other gospels, which it's assumed that John was aware of the other gospels, we all know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and that there's a prophecy that a prophet comes from Bethlehem. And so the idea here is that the Pharisees are choosing not to even hear from Jesus or to engage in the appropriate questioning. That had they done that, that they would have seen that he was from Bethlehem, that they would have seen that, that it does prophesy of a prophet coming from Bethlehem. But they already have this desire to have their own premeditated outcome. And so they come up with this excuse and they say, look into it. You'll see no prophet comes from Galilee. They don't even question Jesus on this one. Um, can Christians trust their moral judgment? So Darley and Batson did this thing called the Good Samaritan study. And that's where they recreated the parable of the Good Samaritan. And they selected people, I think Princeton Theological Seminary, and they selected people specifically who were in the pursuit of ministry. And so they had them attend a lecture on the Good Samaritan, and like they had a lot of variables because it's a good psychological experiment. They had people attend a lecture and then sent them across campus to go give a talk. And along the way, um, they would encounter somebody who needed help, and it was just unavoidable. There's no way for them to get to their point. And the real test was how many of these people who just attended this lecture about the Good Samaritan are going to stop and actually help this person. And they selected Christians. They selected people going in for ministry. And what they found out was not very many. And the mitigating factor of whether or not they stopped to help was whether or not they were rushed. If they were rushed and they had a deadline to meet, some of them literally stepped over the body of this person that was lying in the path in order to rush to their appointment. If they weren't rushed, if they had time, they would stop and ask questions. They would try to help. Um, and because this isn't a complete outlier, a lot of follow-up studies were done, where we tested other helping situations, and results consistently showed that situational variables, whether it was time or something else was going on, that these mattered much more than personality or even religious beliefs. And there's also something called the bystander effect. Like if I'm in a crowd of people and I see somebody needs help, um, there's part of me just kind of assumes that somebody else is going to do it. Uh, that there's the idea of this diffusion of responsibility as opposed to being the only person there. So restoring the Imago Dei. Israel had Moses, the law, and the prophets, yet fell into continuous rebellion. The story of the redemption out of Israel is one of my favorites because, if you doesn't even take a close reading. The nation of Israel complains every step of the way. They're just resisting it. Even when they're fleeing Egypt, they're resisting it. Even after they cross the Red Sea, they rejoice for a little while, and then as soon as they walk into the desert, they're like, "Send us back to Egypt. You just brought us out here so you could kill us in the desert." Um, people have an inclination to fall into continuous rebellion. That's just all of us. Um, Historically, Christianity also has a historical precedent of falling away from God, and that's why we kind of did this history of Christianity from the beginning up to present. Is that even people that call themselves Christians, as much as we want to say that no true Christian would act that way, Christianity writ large, institutionally, has a lot of guilt on its hands. Also, though Christians look to the Bible as the final rule of faith and practice, they've traditionally used the same biblical scriptures to support opposing moral standards. And the big example, the obvious one, was slavery, how and war. Vladimir Putin and Martin Luther both using the same verse to justify war. But there was a debate. A slavery debate that I talked about last week, where both people were using the text of love your neighbor as yourself, and both people were arguing on different sides of the slavery issue. One person saying the right way to love people is for good Christian masters to buy up as many slaves as they can, and the other person is like, no, 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 that's just completely wrong. What we ought to do is have abolition. We need to get rid of this institution. And so what's the guy's at Richard Hayes in his book The Moral Vision of the New Testament, talks about the hermeneutical issue, which is the interpretive issue, is that the Bible says a lot of different things all over the place, and if we approach it with our own value system, whatever it is, if we have a preconceived notion of what it's going to be, we're going to be able to pull stuff out to support anything that we want. And so we really kind of have to be careful about how we approach the Bible, and how we interpret it. It's not enough to say, the Bible says it, I believe it. That's the end of it. It says a lot of things. We have we have a lot of responsibility before we go to the text. So restoring the Imago Dei, looking to Jesus. And that's really kind of the core of what all of this is about, is like, if the Bible says a lot of different things in a lot of different places, if we have, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of denominations, if we have people falling away and everybody here says that the Bible is the rule of faith and practice, what do we do? And so this is where we get at the deep theology of the Gospel of John. And this is, as silly as it sounds, the suggestion that I have is actually the suggestion that Christians seem to be going back to, all throughout the history of Christianity, which is, hey, we need to just look at Jesus and follow him and use him as our example. So here we are in the Gospel of John. It says, the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the bosom of the Father, has made him known. And so we have kind of this idea is that the person and work of Jesus is itself the interpretive guide for understanding the rest of the Bible. And so when we have questions about the Old Testament, is genocide right or wrong? What's going on? Is this law? What kind of clothes should I wear? That Jesus, who is the embodiment of grace and truth, he has made known the will of the Father. Our knowledge of God and even our knowledge of the written word is explained, and that's the word has made known as exegesis, is explained by Jesus through his person and work. So restoring the Imago Dei means looking like God. And if Jesus, therefore, is that manifestation, that explanation of God, then the idea is that we should try to make ourselves and our own lives look as much like him as possible. So we are back to Genesis 1:27a. Let us make mankind in our own image, in our own likeness. Humanity was created to be Tselem in Hebrew, or ikonia in Greek, icons and images of God. That is, representations of God's presence, the instantiation of God in the world. Only Jesus displays God's likeness perfectly. That's John 1:18 and Hebrews 1:3. In Hebrews 1:3, if you look at it closely, you can grab your Bible or jot it down in a little note. The imagery there is kind of staring at the at the brightness of the sun, almost like, during eclipse, that aura that surrounds the sun, radiance of his splendor is kind of the idea of what it's like to look at Jesus. Jesus' demand, then God said, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And then we have in John 13, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So there's this idea of dominion, or this idea of rule is kind of in there, tied up to the image of God. And again, that's why it's kind of important to really think of dominion in terms of this garden and this time with God, or this unity with God. It's kind of a restoring of the natural order, and so that's where we get to this kind of like this, the cosmic significance of theosis, or the cosmic significance of sanctification. And then how did Jesus rule? So I bring up this dominion kind of idea because a lot of Christian sects talk about dominion, and they see Christianity gaining power and ruling in the political sphere, and that's kind of in contrast to like what was happening with Constantine. And really, when we look at the things that where Christianity gone wrong throughout history, it's usually when Christianity has, or any religion for that matter, has political power. They begin to legislate their own morality, and then it becomes no longer a thing of grace or revelation of God, but it becomes like this forceful legalistic rule. And so when we look to Jesus and we ask, like, okay, we're created in God's image, we're created to have dominion and to rule over things, what does that look like? And so we have this right here in John 13. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And in Philippians 2:7, it says that Jesus took the form of a slave. He did not see divinity as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking on the form of the slave. And so rulership is inseparable from service. So once again, John 13 and Genesis 1:27 in action says, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. He says, do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you. And so when we look to this, the foot washing is the example of Christian duty. It's the example of, Jesus, the divine thing, knowing that all things have been given into his hands, comes down and acts as a servant and washes the feet of his disciples right before he goes to the cross. So restoring the Imago Dei, imitating Jesus. I have this wonderful quote from Aristotle: man differs from other animals in that he is the most imitative of creatures, and he learns his earliest lessons by imitation. And so kind of at the core of it, from an ethical teaching perspective, it is that we ought to, imitate Jesus and look at the life that he lived, especially the way it was described in the Gospels, and that ought to be our example. So what does this have to do with the Old Testament? We talked about Judges and second Kings, and so once again, bringing that back, Judges concludes with Israel's similarity to Sodom. We talked about Judges 19 and Genesis 19. That Israel and the nation and the kingdom of Sodom both had fallen into the same kind of sin. And then in 1 Samuel, God saves himself. He doesn't need the help of the people to do good works or to accomplish his mission. He's fully capable of accomplishing it on his own. And that leads us to Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Jeremiah 31 is the new covenant. Behold, I have a new covenant. Not a covenant that's written on tablets, but I'm going to write this law onto their hearts. And then once again in Ezekiel 36, it talks about taking away the heart of stone and replacing it with a heart of flesh. We're talking about a transformation that happens that's a transformation of nature. It's a transformation from within. God wants a change of heart from all of us. The good works and the mission are secondary to this. I will write my law on their hearts. I will give them hearts of flesh. And so as we begin to wrap it up with just a couple of slides left, restoring the image, the Imago Dei, it means becoming like Jesus. Theosis, the fruit and the true vine. Jesus is the true vine, and we are his branches. His disciples partake in his being and then bear fruit. And we'll see this throughout, the Gospels, that good trees produce good fruit. The call to obedience or the call to the Christian life isn't, about stuff that we do, whether it's good deeds or things that we accomplish. It's a call to be transformed into good trees. And then once we become good trees, we're going to bear good fruit. We see that also in the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians. And I like how that after it says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long suffering, patience, kindness, goodness. It ends with against such things there is no law. If you're bearing the fruit of the Spirit, you're not living under law. You don't have to live under the law. You're not doing anything that the law has to condemn you for. You're just bearing fruit. So there's a continuous emphasis on character. Following Jesus means looking like him, revealing God's nature in the world. Like Paul says, be imitators of me as I also am an imitator of Christ. Even if you have an imperfect image of Christ, Paul says, well, then look to me because I'm doing my best to look like Jesus. So what good work can you do that the Lord cannot do for himself? That's really kind of the big question. The answer is nothing. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord protects the city, its watchmen stand guard in vain. What can you give that he cannot obtain for himself? Once again, nothing. I have no need of a bull from your stall or of goats from your pens, for every animal in the forest is mine and the cattle on 1,000 hills. So God is completely self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything from us. So with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of gold? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And that is it. So I hope that worked.
Yes, it was excellent. And the sound quality was great. If you
Yay.
could now try to put on your video and see if
Let's
it's
see what happens.
yes.
Hi, I'm here. Is it all
Yes, it's all
funky?
good. All
All
good.
good. All right.
Okay. All right, folks.
Take notes
So
from you.
what's that?
Now I will take notes from you guys.
Yes, exactly. Folks, go ahead. Comments, questions. What did you think? You can go ahead and raise your hand and go ahead. I will start with Evanik.
Yeah, Gary, first of all, great presentation. Um, I'm not going to cut my video on because, I don't want to mess anything up, but,
Oh, that's
uh,
okay. That's a
Uh,
beautiful dress you got there.
Evanik, it's not going to hurt. It's only Gary's video is the problem.
okay. But I wanted to just, a couple thoughts that came into my
Yes.
head. It's like when you, talk about, human nature and the Old Testament and how it showed how the Israelites, gets all these blessings from God and then just messes it up. Like, and I think it's the theme that, all human beings are going to mess up at some point. At some point, we're not going to reflect God's rules, right? Like, God had so many rules, and then, but it wasn't so much that like they would like mess up a minuscule rule, Like that wasn't the issue. The issue is that they would deliberately sin. Like they would deliberately go against God, knowing full well. You saw, like you talked about Moses being in the desert, and they're like, "Take me home. This is too hard. Take me home." Um, but the thing is that they had to wander for 40 years where they could have only been in the desert for 11 days, but they complained about every day. Like they didn't trust, it boiled down to that they didn't trust God, right? And
Yeah.
in the Old Testament, you saw with the kings like David, you know, he goes and, he's one of God's great servants, and God shows him great mercies, but he doesn't save him from like the consequences of his own actions, you know, with Beersheba and Uriah. Like,
Hmm.
yes, God forgave you, but now you don't get to build this temple, and now his David's reign is going to come to an end because it started off with sin in his actions. um Solomon, the same thing. Solomon asked for wisdom, and then he goes and he takes up with foreign women and starts worshiping their gods. And it's just, I think it's human nature, and I think that's what's so important about the New Testament and Jesus, is that he shows you in human form, like, this is how you're supposed to act. And I think one of the first things that we need to do is, in order to act like Jesus, is to get to know Jesus, and getting to know who he is, not just as a divine person, but as a human being. What was he like? He was straightforward. You know, he did not hold back. He did not sugarcoat anything. He told people straight up, like, you're sinning right now. You're not being genuine because you're not helping the poor. You're not being genuine because you're looking at all these rules and you're holding people to these rules, and they're stringent. You're not being loving. You're not caring about your neighbor. There was, he used various parables to show, you know, you're not doing what God commands you to do. But I'm here to show you how to do it. And they still were like, nah, no, I'm not going to believe that. So I think it's just very interesting how our own human nature can keep us from doing what we know to do. And like you said, against, when you talk about that verse, when you talk about, loving each other, there is nothing against that. Like, that's the bottom line. It's like, we're supposed to love each other. If you had this commandment, if you obeyed this commandment, you got it all. And we're like, nah, we're not gonna do that. Like, we're gonna, I think it's the sense of, like, as human beings, we want to feel like we're superior to everybody. We also, there's things that we just don't want to do. We don't want to be loving to everybody. We want to disagree. We want to, you know, um, be right. Like, like, that is a human nature thing. It's like everybody wants to be right about it, and no one really wants to go for what's the good of humanity. Everybody's just like, I just want to be right. So I think we have to look at, like, in order to truly be like Jesus, to look at our own human nature, look at those flaws, and when we mess up, repent, right? And, go back to doing the good that we know to do. So thank you, Gary, for that. So those were just my thoughts.
Thank you, Evanique. Um, it's interesting because that's one of the you nailed it from the very beginning, is that when we look at Israel, it's analogous to human nature, and something that early commentators and early Christians kind of failed to do is they looked at it and didn't see Israel as a stand-in for humanity writ large, but they say, like, see, the Jews are very stubborn. They couldn't even obey when God did all of this, and as silly as that sounds, that's kind of what launched them pretty much into this anti-Judaism, and then kind of started breeding into anti-Semitism throughout history. It's the failure to see Israel as analogous to really any human being, and just like that is what's taking place there, is this analog of what it means to be human, and that we are all, you know, susceptible to falling away. And I like your analogy. We brought this up many times about David and Solomon. It's like that's the golden age of the kingdom of Israel. And so they're very best rulers. They're two best guys. You know, the first one commits murder and rape, followed by a guy who says, "Oh, I only want to serve you, God," and then serves thousands of other gods, you know, immediately after. That's the high point of the Israel kingdom. You know, and so it's really kind of zooming in on how much humanity writ large, we all need that redemption, and unrelenting grace, like of still holding on to people and trying to provide a way back. And that's how Kings ends. That most important aspect of it is when that whole arc is over, it's looking forward to God's continued act of redemption, even in spite of exile, you know, even in the disillusion of the monarchy, you know, even as it completely falls apart. It's still looking forward, saying, well, Yahweh has not left us. But thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right,
Thanks.
who's next?
It's Jeannie. Jeannie, go ahead. And folks would love to hear from as many of you that want to speak. So please go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Jeannie, floor is
So
all yours.
thank you very much, Gary. And I had a couple thoughts here. One was that I mean, in my own life, I was always faced with impossible tasks. And what could be more impossible than, you know, being like Jesus? I mean, you have to give up everything. It's a tough life. It's very tough. And I think maybe some homeless people are trying to do that very thing, but you know, it's hard to be successful at it. People don't want to gather around and listen to you, you know. I mean, it's hard to be Jesus. It's very hard. So I also think that loving your neighbor, it's put forward because it is the hardest thing to do. I mean, it's easier to love those that are remote or in your imagination or whatever, but to actually, and it's different with your, you know, you're able to put up with certain things with your family, but the neighbor it's like sandpaper, and it's a very, very difficult thing to get along with them. So, and I was wondering, you know, do you see it the same way? And do you think there's other examples, you know, in the story that are also just put forward? I mean, if you have a goal that's impossible to reach, you know, I mean, you can spend a lot of time trying for it. Whereas if it's something that you can reach, you know, you may like, I'll throw this in. I knew someone that, you know, won Olympic gold medals or silver or whatever, you know, and that was the end of their life because they had reached their goal. You know what I'm saying? You really don't want to reach your goal. The second part I wanted to mention was, you know, the problem of, you know, humility. Yes, humble, but also Jesus was extremely self-righteous, which I think is followed very well by most Christians today. And most of us, even if we're not Christian, you know, we're very self-righteous. I mean, he was very sure of himself and what was right and what was wrong. And, you know, and I mean, in that way, we are following Jesus, but you know, I mean, a lot is like what Evanique was saying, you know, that you have to speak out when things are wrong, you know, and that you have to, you know, go out on a limb when things are very difficult. So, you know, I'm just wondering, but there's also, you know, humble. I mean, you can be both. It's not impossible, but I think we are managing to be as self-righteous as Jesus was, pretty much everyone I know. I'll stop right there.
Go ahead, Gary.
Oh, do you have? Are you done, Jeannie? Is there any more that you
Yes.
had to say?
No, she's just finished. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to turn off my video just to make certain it's not choppy.
Gary, it's working very well. Video. Welcome to turn off the video, but it's working very well now.
Okay. All right, here we are. I really like that. What's more impossible than being like Jesus? He set such an example. And that loving your neighbor is really, oh my gosh. Just your insights are really good. I took good notes, Jeannie, and I just want to say thank you. Um, Part of me, thinks that the notion of Jesus being poor, um, and having so little, that's also really significant because it means that virtue is, it kind of goes in the face of like Aristotle, which thought that you needed to have status, you needed to have money, you needed to have all of these things. And so in the context, the historical context, it's really significant because Jesus had none of those things, none of those trappings, which would make for the good life. And especially in the Gospel of John, we talk about again and again the abundant life and living that abundant life and having eternal life and experiencing that in the real. And so there's part of it where I think you're absolutely right, is that it's like this impossible example that we might never live up to, and that it's a difficult thing to love your neighbor. But at the same time, it kind of lowers the bar. It's like you don't need to have all this stuff in life in order to please God, and that's really in line with the Old Testament saying, especially that last verse that I read from Micah 6:8, is you don't need to have a bunch of stuff, a bunch of sacrifice, or a bunch of things to give God. Is He just wants you to work on your heart. But yeah, that's what I have to say. So
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Rojin. Rojin, go ahead.
Mostly I have a question, and I regret that I missed quite a bit, and I'm not sure it's a relevant question, but do you ideally mostly want to reach leaders of the church or members of congregations? Is that a relevant question? I'm
yeah,
curious.
no, no, that's I think it was DLJ keep bringing up that question of like, who is your audience and who are you trying to reach? And what I found is that it'll probably have its best reception for people that are already sympathetic to what I think, whatever, it'll be a good apologetic to help people stand firm in their faith. But also it's gonna reach out pretty well. Um, how do I say this? Most people, when they look at the example of Jesus, like, are, whether they're Christian or not, can get on board with that. It's like Jesus was at the very least a good person. And within the Christian community, almost unanimous, people will say, I want to be like Jesus. That's the example. And so from that perspective, we're casting a broad net as we're trying to say, what does it really mean to be like Jesus? And maybe that's where I'm getting a little bit more academic or talking about some taboo subjects. It's like, to really be like Jesus, let's take a step back and look at the ways the churches has not been like Jesus, and look at ourselves, and the organizations that we support or maybe that we're even a part of. And that's the thing that really disturbs me is when Christians get behind people and organizations that are manifestly not very Christ-like, and jump on board and say, well, we have certain Christian objectives that we want to accomplish, and so we can ignore that for now because, we're getting what we want, whatever that means. It bothers me that people want to have like Bible taught in secular schools, but at the same time don't think twice about other people's free speech when they're not necessarily Christians. That was never really a Christian ideal early on. And even with the Edict of Milan, that was kind of really a pioneering thing, is that it said, hey, let everybody have freedom of religion across the board, pagans and Christians and Jews alike. Let everybody be free to practice what they want to practice.
Gary,
You have one follow-up. So do you have an underlying theory or hope of how change happens, sort of from the people up to the leaders or hoping for leaders? I guess you've implied from the people up to the leaders or selecting better leaders. Is that what's underlying there?
Um, I kind of, for right or wrong, see kind of a crisis in Christianity. And I did this, that's why I went back to school, a couple of years ago, to do this, to work through it. And so I don't know what I'll accomplish or if I'll accomplish anything or who the message will go to. But I don't want to sit idly by. And so I'm like, I'm kind of taking it like my own advice there is God doesn't really need me to do anything. He'll do what he wants to do with or without me. So I'm just saying like, okay, I have this talent, I have this desire, I'll go ahead and bring it forward and we'll see what happens.
Sorry, I want to rephrase Rogene's question because she's asking something very specific,
Okay.
and I don't think you've addressed it. What she's asking is that there are leaders and there is the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to influence things top down? Are you trying to change things in the leaders and then come down? Or are you trying to do things bottom up? Is your audience primarily Christians at large? Or is your audience the quote unquote leaders? What do you think?
Oh, I like that question. And I guess I haven't thought too much on that. Is I've kind of in my mind maybe saw it as leaders. But I also taught a lot of Bible study in my local church, and I found that the best questions come from the bottom up. That the leaders kind of have in their head what they think the lay people need to learn, and they have an assumption of what they think, that the lay people know. And when they preach their sermons and teach their lessons, they kind of dumb things down because they think the lay people are uninformed. And I found that that's not true. That the lay people want to know the deep things. And so in that sense, I'm kind of hoping to inform people from the bottom up. I think it'll be probably more exciting for lay people. They'll feel like, oh, this is some meat and potatoes. And so I hope I write it well in that respect. Because I think that if you did give it to the leaders, it would fail to trickle down because they would try to down the message before they reached it to the lay people. At least that's what I've observed.
So, where my question is coming from is I have a friend who's been active in a church, sort of fundamentalist, evangelical, although she's a little fuzzy on her own theology, but she's become very disillusioned that the church, maybe the same way you are, that the church is not living up to what she expects. And it's a discussion group of 4. And she's saying, well, should I leave my church and look for another or cause trouble? And I have no idea I caused some trouble in a church in San Francisco, and I don't know, it's what I thought I had to do. I don't know how it turned out. I guess that's up to God, but I don't know what to say to her. So if you have a suggestion.
I'll tell you what, immediately after writing this thesis, I had a really profound spiritual crisis in that I was looking at everything that was going on, and I began to question like if the church can act this way, how can anybody claim that the Holy Spirit is in the church? And I know that some of these people, many of the people in this church, had a saving commitment of faith at some point in their lives. And somehow here they are harboring, abusers, you know, defending the organization against moral sin. Personally, I had a really strong issue with the politics, with, and again, I'm trying not to engage too directly in this series, but it really bothered me how when I saw like this really kind of idolatrous artwork of like, Jesus embracing, Donald Trump, this artwork stuff, kind of things going around. And I was just like, wait a minute, this is a shady business guy. You guys really believe he's a Christian? What's going on here? And there was a disconnect. And it was, and also a failure to really discuss like, money and politics and things like that. They were just really happy to have, I don't know, this facade of Christianity in the public sphere, but not a real moral commitment to it. I guess that's what I would say is that Donald Trump is really good as portraying this veneer of Christianity, and so these churches are on board believing that the United States is a Christian nation, but it's a veneer. And underneath it all, there's all this, it's like the whitewashed tombs that Jesus says, behold, you're like whitewashed tombs. You look all pretty on the outside, and inside you're full of dead men's bones. And that's what I was seeing with the way American politics and Christianity is working. And
That's
it hurts me.
that's kind of the crisis my friend is having. Well, I got to the crisis years ago, so it's like, and have not come to a really good resolution. Well, and maybe partly that's the role of a follower of Jesus. Nobody promised that it would be clear or easy.
There's that. But there's
Yeah.
also like, that's where the Old Testament analogy, I brought that up, really kind of falls in, is the entire nation of Israel had kind of like revolted, in spite of
Yeah.
everything, and when the Ark of the Covenant gets taken away by the Philistines, that's against the backdrop of what took place in Judges, where it just depicted, Israel had really fallen in the worst place it could possibly be. It was in the same state that Sodom was when fire rained down from it, from heaven, and destroyed it. It's like, this is what the nation of Israel, God's chosen people that he redeemed out of Egypt, this is what they have descended into, even with God's immediate leadership. And so there's kind of like this comfort that God is going to do what he's going to do,
Mhm.
regardless of what we claim to be and what his people claim to be.
Was Sodom part of Israel? Really? I
No,
don't know that.
no, that's
No.
Genesis 19. That's where Lot is in the that story is Lot is staying in Sodom, and God's going to destroy
Yeah.
it, and the angels come down and say, hey, you need to get out of town.
But was Sodom part of Israel? I mean, was it Jewish?
It was not Jewish. This is it was
No.
probably
Okay.
old. We're talking probably like maybe old. I'd have to look into the geography of the land, but it's like 2000 BC, so time of Abraham. And so maybe
Okay.
even old Babylonian Empire kind of a thing.
I
Or
just never wondered about it before, but
yeah.
I know the story. Yeah, I get it. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to make one comment, Gary.
Yes.
Like, I see the entire structure of Christianity to be bottom up. It's always been like that. Even when you look at the reaction to Christ, it's like when he's entering, the most dramatic point of that is his entry into Jerusalem. People are coming
Yeah.
to him, crying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And the leadership want to kill him. Okay, it's always been that way. And he puts it very, very simply, the highest is the lowest, and the lowest is the highest. And if you want to be the leader, you have to be the lowest. And that is completely against the structure, that hierarchical structures that we have. So if your work has to have any hope at all, it has to be directed towards the grassroots. It has to be that things always flow bottom up. That's how America is. That's how that's how Christianity is. What was that? Oh, there's all fireworks. You did that. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, just a comment.
I think you nailed it, because like again, sometimes when I'm looking at all this stuff, I get stuck in the weeds or stuck in the trees and fail to see the forest. My church back home brought up your point, like almost every sermon, that the kingdom is an upside down kingdom.
Mhm.
You know, the first is last, the last is first. You know, and that, you know, if we want to follow Jesus, we have to really embrace that upside down nature of the kingdom of God. So thank you for that reminder. I needed it.
Oh, thank you. Next up is let's go with Katie, followed by Jeannie. Katie, go ahead.
I hope my question's not too confusing. So Jesus washes the feet of Judas to show to be a servant, but we don't wash feet anymore. So how are we looking for the principle behind the thing? How do we know what actions? I mean, you know what I mean? Are we just looking for a principle behind it?
I'm trying to think of what was it? I think it was a movie called The Jesus Revolution. Did you see it or have you heard of it?
I have not.
So it's the story about the founding of, I believe, Calvary Chapel back in like the Jesus movement in the 60s and 70s. And I only bring it up because this guy has this church, and all these hippies start showing up. Some of them wearing shoes, some of them not, tracking mud into the church, and the people complain. And so the next service, he actually sits there at the entrance and washes their feet as they come in. And this is a true story, so it's not just a movie about it, but that's exactly what he did. And he was so about opening up his church and welcoming anybody that came in. I think a bunch of his congregation might have left, but it started an entire movement at that time. And I only bring it up is because like it might very well include literal foot washing. Foot washing is practiced as a as kind of an ordinance in some churches. And I remember growing up Catholic, we had a service where the priest would wash people's feet. But generally, that was hospitality. When we look at foot washing anywhere in the Bible, we see it not just in the upper room discourse, but we also see it in it's throughout the Old Testament. Abraham does it for the visitors that come to him. We see it throughout various places. It was common in Greco-Roman culture. And when it talks about foot washing, sometimes even the phrase "and then they wash their feet" is to indicate that they received a guest, that they were hospitable to whoever it was that was visiting them. And so again, foot washing represents like two things. One, this hospitality, this generosity, and this humility that goes across everybody. But two, and this is the thing that's really significant, is in this period of time, foot washing was a status symbol. It was always a slave that did the foot washing, or a servant or somebody of lower status. And in this story, it makes it really clear that Jesus, it establishes Jesus' status before the foot washing, that he knew that he received all things, that all things had been given to him by God, that he was returning to God, that he came from heaven and was going back. And then he washes the feet. And so it's making this claim of the way we're supposed to treat other people, but also that we're supposed to do it with this humility, that it's a obfuscation or obliviation of status. So yeah, it's the humility is kind of the big thing that's being taught there, in addition to hospitality with humility. I hope that answers your question a little bit. And then Shrikant
Yeah.
has more to add.
No, Katie, go ahead. Would you like a follow-up?
Yeah,
Is
it seems like you're saying it could include literal, it could also include the principle. So maybe, and any time you're showing, in your example of leaders, your leaders also being kind of a servant, like servant leaders, rather than
Yeah.
just kind of just teaching kind of the Bible as kind of more legalistic.
Absolutely. And that's probably my biggest issue that I have is I don't think the Bibleistic should be the Bible, sorry, Bibleistic. The Bible should be taught legalistically. Even when you look at, the law section, the Torah, first 5 books, it's mostly narrative. It's narrative. And then when it gives the laws, like immediately after it gives a bunch of laws, it tells a story about how the people couldn't keep the laws. And if there's a single when you look at it at whole, if there's a single lesson to be learned through the laws of the Old Testament, it's that people can't keep them no matter what. Because that's what keeps being reinforced again. God gives them a bunch of laws and they immediately break them. Then he gives them more laws and they break those. And again and again and again, all the people do is break laws. And so legalism, that's kind of the mission of the Old Testament, is that legalism isn't an answer. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jeannie, you're next.
So, Gary, you had brought up hermeneutics at the
Yes.
beginning, and I was in special ed for a number of years, and teaching it, and and
That's
every
okay.
year
You don't have to clarify.
every year they came out with a new method, a new, way to do it. And this was going to be it. I mean, but it was very frustrating because each year we had to learn, this new method that's going to work. And I was a little frustrated because there never seemed to be one that, okay, this is it and it works. And I think that's actually maybe a good and necessary thing. And that it's like you have to keep turning things over, and like there has to be somebody in every organization that's doing a little bit of stirring up trouble, maybe like Rogine, or, questioning the way things are done, bringing in, I mean, I love it. Back when I was going to church, they'd bring in somebody from the outside and they would have, just very different ideas of how things worked. It was, it's refreshing to change it up a bit, either bringing in new people or new ideas or new I mean, like CJ's ways, new ways to discuss things, new exercises to try to get people. But not to say, I think there is something to the tradition, part of it, and that there needs to be a continuity, and that is important to a lot of people. But there seems to be this necessary, I don't think we're going to like reach an answer, that the thing is a matter of turning it over and over and looking at it afresh each time.
I agree with you. And in some circles, like conservative Christian circles, back to that notion of hermeneutics, they have a very specific way of interpreting the Bible. And so when I go through this, I have that in the back of my head, is that I want to make certain that that I'm offering an interpretation or presenting the Gospel of John in such a way that people from different interpretive traditions, it appeals across the board. And I want for those people that have really strong conservative attitudes towards it, their own interpretive slant, I want it to be able to appeal to them also, so that regardless of what tradition you come from, that it kind of like speaks to you. But yeah, when I mentioned hermeneutics, I quickly caught myself because I realized that not everybody knows what hermeneutics is. That just simply means the science and art of interpretation. What is our hermeneutic is our method of interpretation. The rules by which we go, to approach any text, and it doesn't have to be the Bible. But yeah, I was concerned that not everybody knows what that word means.
So Gary, what I want to do is I want to take the lesson of your entire presentation that we should focus on Jesus.
Yes.
Is it okay if we did that for some time?
Yes.
So let's do that. Forget about how people see him, misunderstand what's wrong with the church. Let's just focus on Jesus for some time. Okay.
Yeah.
The best place for me is to look at the prologue. Okay. So if you don't mind, can we talk about the prologue for rest of the time?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So folks, I don't know how familiar you are, but would love to make it interactive. Gary, please chime in whenever you want.
Mhm.
So, prologue is one of my favorite parts of the scriptures. So, I don't know how to do it because this is just too familiar to me. So I don't know how to do it. So I'm just going to just start talking, and then would love to, if you want to say something or ask something, just focus on questions for now, okay? Because prologue is like the basically overview of who Christ is, okay? So just focus. If you have anything, just ask questions, okay? All right. So it goes, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Okay, that's the beginning of it. It's like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Ba, 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 right? It goes like, in the beginning was the Word, and then rest of it just fleshes it out. So it is saying that the Word, who's the Word? Word is Christ. He's in the beginning. Okay, beginning, what is beginning? Beginning, actually, the word in Greek, it is arche, that means foundation. Okay, so he's saying that in the foundation itself, the word was. So the Son was with the Father. Okay, and the with, the word there is pros in Greek, which means actually towards. So Son was towards the Father. Okay, or Son was face to face with the Father. So you can see the persons are there right in the beginning, and the interaction between them is there right at the beginning. Okay. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Okay. Then it goes, all things were made through him. Without him, nothing was made that was made. And when it says all things are made through him, it's not one time. So he's not just the creator, he's what sustains it. And that is explained in the next one. Without him nothing was created that was created. In him was life. So what it's saying is that he's life itself. So we are basically dust, and he's our life. He gives us water, he gives us air, he gives us light or fire. Okay, so without that we can't do much. He's our life. So in him was life. Like, I'm reading a Marathi translation of it. It uses source of light. It says, he's the source. He's the source of life. Okay, it's like the seed from which life comes. It's a miraculous seed. It's the seed of everything. Okay, but it needs a kind of fertile heart. It needs a clean heart for it to grow. Okay, so that's the idea of life. Okay, that's again the word there for life is Zoe, which actually means eternal life. It's the self-sustaining life of God. That's what he has in him. Okay. And the life was the light of men. That means it actually shows us the way. It shows us how to have life. Okay, so that's what it's meant. And light shines in the darkness, and darkness did not comprehend it. So no matter how dark your life is, how dark your heart is, how dark your mind is, the light will keep on shining. Okay, and anytime you want, you can turn back to it. So that's the first 5 verses. So I'm just going to pause here, and Gary, go ahead. What are your thoughts? If you would like to add anything, and then so what we'll do is I'll speak a little bit. I'll have Gary add things to it, and then please feel free to ask any questions. Gary, go ahead.
Well, the first time I went to grad school many, many years ago, my subject was the book of Hebrews. And there are a lot of affinities between the opening chapter of Hebrews and the opening chapter of John. Because it's like, in many portions and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers through the prophets, has in the last of these days spoken to us through his Son, who is appointed heir of all things, through whom he upholds all things by the word of his power, who is the exact radiance and representation of his character. And it has all of this, just like John is doing, seeing God, seeing Jesus, and what the book of Hebrews portrays is this living word that is speaking to us right here and right now in the present moment, and asking us, are you going to hearken to the word of Jesus, right here, right now? And so it's whether one came before the other, they're playing off a very similar tradition. And they're both very, especially in the Greek, but they're both just equally poetic in the way they portray themselves. And it's because I don't think Hebrews uses the word logos, it uses the word rhema. So it uses a slightly different word on purpose, the spoken word. What's that?
What does rhema mean?
Rhema also means word. So you have logos and you have rhema. And logos is kind of like that logical, maybe that written, analytic word. And then rhema is kind of like the living word, or the spoken word, or kind of like, a blend of pneuma and logos, as the rhema. I don't know how else to describe it.
That's beautiful. Mike, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes.
Questions at this point. Mike, you keep going. Your mic keeps going on and off.
Difficulty. How the system handles interrupts isn't very clear. I view the key issue that you're talking about is that Imago Dei, the image of God.
Mike, wait. We're just talking about the Gospel of John. Right now we're just talking about.
Well, that is part of it, that we should be Christlike.
Go ahead.
That is part of it. That's what I'm driving at. Let me develop a point here.
Sure.
This is as compared, and they brought in how the King Solomon fell too, because they overlooked some of these things. Now, another trend opposite the image of God, the being Christ-like, is Opus Dei, that you should concentrate on works. And I view that as very much like how Epictetus viewed Stoicism and how Nietzsche viewed Stoicism, the love of faith. That what one viewed Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius viewed Stoicism as you should love your faith and accept it, and Nietzsche said you should struggle against your faith and change it. So I just wonder if that issue is how we interpret Imago Dei is the heart of this. And so I can get a better understanding, is your overall master's thesis out on the internet someplace that I could do a quick read and try and see your context? And I yield the balance of my time with that confusing list of questions or whatever.
If you go into Google Scholar, Mike, I don't know if you've ever
used it. Let's do one thing. Go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay, I could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I know about Google Scholar. I looked for you there and couldn't find you, but that's
really?
I
Okay.
didn't look for the right thing.
So
do what do as Mr. Shrikant said. Put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
we'll do.
okay, so okay, sorry about the interruption. Let's continue with the prologue. Okay.
Can I maybe get an answer to is Imago Dei be Christ-like the heart of your thesis?
That is at the heart of my thesis, is that the Imago Dei, that Jesus is is the fullest expression of what it means, what the Imago Dei means. And to reclaim the Imago Dei is to be Christ-like to the best of our ability. But we're also looking at it from the concept of theosis. And that's where Shrikant is leading us right now with the prologue to the Gospel of John, is that Jesus is the instantiation. He's the physical presence of God, here on earth. And when we abide in him, then we partake of that divine nature, and then God becomes present on earth through us also, especially, as through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. But I'll yield to Shrikant.
All right, so let's continue with the prologue. Let's just focus on the prologue, okay? Because that's the best. If you want to see what Christ is, that's the best place to see it. So the second paragraph, so what we went through was the first 5 verses, which is the first paragraph. Now we're going to go through the second paragraph. Second paragraph suddenly moves to the earth. It starts to talk. It says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came to bear witness. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, so all through him may believe. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. Okay, so now the question is, why is it suddenly moving to earth? And why is it suddenly talking about John? Why? Because it's showing us John is just a placeholder for what human beings need to be. He's the greatest of saints, greatest of human saints, greatest of male saints. And what is he saying? What does John say? John is basically saying, he's the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. So he's separated himself from the city, from all the hub. He's left that. And he's saying, he's doing a baptism of water to wash away things that are not pointed towards God, so that you can receive God. So he's kind of clearing the path of God. He's also a witness. Witness, the word in Greek, original Greek, is martyr. So martyr and witness is the same. So that's about John. Gary, you have any thoughts about John?
I really liked what you had said about him the last time we had a discussion when we went over the Gospel of John. Because it seems like this interruption. We're talking about the Logos, and then we stop and we're like, oh, and then there's this guy named John. And then it goes back to the Logos, and it's like, okay, why is there this interruption? And I kind of like I really kind of like, if I understood you correctly, it's like that's really what we do when we embody, when the Spirit is dwelling with us, when we abide in Christ and people see us, then we become a witness. We're basically showing people Jesus.
That's right. And what I would say is that, you discuss these 3 stages, right? Sanctification,
the catharsis and the theoria and then theosis.
Right. The catharsis or sanctification is what John is about.
Yeah.
John is about, it's like baptism by water, so that you can have baptism by Spirit. It is kind of cleaning out the old man. It's basically, he's about death. It so happens that in the church calendar, tomorrow is his is the feast of is basically the fast for beheading of the John the Baptist. So that's,
Okay.
so it's appropriate to be talking about him now. So that's what it is. He's this is kind of part of the cross where the old man has to die so the new man has to come. New man can come. So he is showing you how the old man needs to die. That's what John keeps saying. That he's the one who's about death. He's about water. He's about washing away, so that the next thing can happen. And what's the next thing? Next thing is the third paragraph, which goes, the true light, which gives light to everyone or enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own. His own people did not receive him. But to all those who did receive him and believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, born not of blood, nor the will of flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. So that's the idea. That's about the incarnation. So God is coming, and then of course the full force of it comes in the next, the last paragraph, which goes, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And again, that dwelt among is a very poor translation. Dwelt actually means tabernacle. The word there is tabernacle. What is the word, Gary?
The Greek word is like, yeah, it is tabernacled, and I can't remember if it's like skleroma or something like that. It's
So it's tabernacle. So what he's saying is that, the word came and made its home in us individually and in the church, that is 2 or 3 gathered in his name. Church doesn't mean the building. It doesn't mean the hierarchical organization. It means 2 or 3 gathered in his name. So he makes his home there. Okay, so that's what it is saying.
and it's significant because that word tabernacled, because that's where the Ark of the Covenant resides. And so it's in that one word when it says he dwelt at, it's like that, then God is there, and so we had access, through Jesus. It's saying right there, he came here and God came on earth, and so the tabernacle, the physical presence of God was present. And so that's what it's kind of recalling for the reader there is that, okay, God was physically present with his people. And so from this point on, whenever it talks about Jesus, it's like, this is what it looks like to have God present.
Yes. So it goes, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him and cried out, "This was one of whom I said, the one who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. From his fullness we have received grace upon grace." The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, has made him known. So that's the whole arc about Christ. Now, I don't know whether it is, if people have questions about it, or what do you guys think? But to me, this is like one of the most beautiful summaries of incarnation and what the incarnation is for. So would love to hear anybody's comments.
And I guess that I would, sum up as like, that's kind of the answer to, a bunch of the questions that people had. And I like that we went back to the prologue there, because that's what it means. What is it to restore the Imago Dei? When I wrote my thesis, I felt like it was important to remind us that we don't have a clear picture of it using human reasoning and all these ethical paradigms, that the only clear picture we're going to get is looking at Jesus. And that's kind of where the prologue really ends with, is that, Jesus is grace and truth. No one has seen God at any time, but Jesus has explained him, and it's in that presence.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the Imago Dei in relation. I think that's beautiful, because I mean, he is human and he's God. So you're looking at him, so you're seeing him, but mostly you're seeing the human part of him. But the divine part of him is there in him, and it will flash through occasionally, and it will flash when it flashes, when the spirit flows, whenever it um whenever it flows. Yes, he prays and he gets angry, so he's very much human, he's fully human. And that's very important, because that's important for our salvation. Otherwise, how can he communicate with us? Because before this, in the Old Testament, God is distant. He's sitting in this tabernacle. There is the curtain, and the only high priest can go in, and he can go in only once a year. Okay, that's the contact with God that we have. Occasionally, there are prophets that he will send and will kill them. So that's just the way in which the contact with God was. Whereas here, God is coming. So in a sense, Christ is God. Christ is also image of God. You can see God through him, God the Father through him, and he has come to dwell in us. So when he dwells in us, you have him in you, and he's acting through you. Jeannie would love to answer any questions. Go ahead. Would love to hear what you think.
Well, it just seems to me there's a strong focus here on, words, the verbal part of our existence, rather than on deeds. But perhaps the word being the Bible or the Gospels is the story of the deeds that Jesus, I mean, what's more important, and how in this whole equation, how important is it that we speak? Is that, I mean, can we just do deeds and that's good enough? Or do we have to speak like Jesus, and
Sure.
okay, about that, that's about it.
Okay, let me answer it. This is a very profound question. Okay, the way it has worked is that there is thoughts, words, and deeds. So there is stuff that is happening in your mind. You're speaking it out to others, and then there is deed. Okay, you're actually acting on it, and all of it have to be there for it to be right. You can't just have deeds without the words. You can't have words without the thought. So, like Gregory of Nazianzus, he says, God the Father is like the mind. The word is the word in the mind. So when he's in the beginning, it says in the beginning was the word. The foundation is the mind. You think of your entire brain, okay? And the word is a very special kind of a word, because it's the word of the mind. So that's a word that captures what the mind is, what God the Father is in a word. And now at this point, it is there in the mind, and then it is spoken out. Okay, and then it is written. Written is the deeds. You're making, you're writing your speech into your actions, making it physical. So all these three things, these are different stages of expression of God on earth. So all three things have to be there, and they have to all come together. If you focus only on deeds, that is very much what the Pharisees were doing, because you become too focused on rituals. you think that by just doing the proper rituals, and you lose connection of the rituals with the Spirit, so much so that when God Himself, the Spirit Himself, is coming and standing in front of you, you can't see Him. And you, to the extent to which you see Him, you want to destroy Him. So that's the limitations on just focusing on the deeds. Of course, focusing just on words without them being fully expressed in deeds, that's actually separating out this life from what you think is spirit. But that's not what Christ is about. That's not what Christianity is about. Christianity is about bringing heaven to earth, of bringing spirit, making spirit manifest in your life. So it is all about this joining together. Christ is a symbol. Symbol in Greek means sim, means together, and bal means throw. So he throws together spirit and matter. He throws together God and man to make it one. He integrates all of it. Jeannie, go ahead.
I didn't have anything else to say.
Oh, I just noticed your exclamation mark. Okay.
Oh, it's still there. Oh,
No, that's fine. That's fine.
yeah, I should erase it.
I
No.
if I could reply one little thing is the issue, one of the big issues that I was encountering was a Christianity that focuses so much on words and not on deeds. And so the gospel began to be this thing that you say, and it wasn't associated with doing much of anything. And especially like at the conference that I attended, it really smacks of that. And so I think that it was really insightful what you were saying. And there's probably to a degree, I would say it's we would probably do well, at least in modern evangelical Christianity, to shift a little bit back towards deeds a little bit. But my biggest concern is this ontological separation that Shrikant just mentioned, is that this what's happening is words and deeds are becoming separated, to where people look at only the words and say this is the gospel, or only the deeds, this is the gospel. But more so in modern Christianity, only the words, separated from it. And that the two need to have, their being needs to be reunited. And that's, if I understand what you're getting at, Shrikant, that's really one of the other main points, is this resuming the union between the two, as opposed to separating them.
No, that's very good. I'll just say one thing. There are three things that need to come together. One is the experience of God. That is the actual kind of your heart feeling it, so it's the experience itself. The second is the words, and the third is the deeds. So it's like those three things. So it's like the first one is mostly about the Holy Spirit that is actually acting in you. The second one is about the word, where you have the word, you have the entire kind of gospel in you. And the third one is your actions reflecting it. So it's like you're building the kingdom of God outside. So there is that external expression, there is expression in your speech, and then there is, feeling of God in your heart. And so sometimes the problem, I think, in much of the Christianity that you're talking about, is that it's too word focused. So it is also, not only it has lost connection with deeds, but it has also lost connection with the experience of God. So there is, or if it goes in the direction of just experience, then it is separated from words and deeds. So it's like you can have one of the three, but Christ is one, God is one, and human being is also one. And we have this kind of Trinitarian nature. We have the body, we have the mind, and we have the heart. And all three, when they're together, then you are a person. Otherwise, you're not a person. you're either automata, or you're like a computer, or you're just, just a kind of a, emotional machine or something. But it's all kind of, all three of them have to come together. Does that make sense?
I agree. I think
Right.
my only caveat there is with regards to the experience of God. Many churches like isolate that experience to the time spent singing in church, and they don't necessarily branch it out to it's the experience of God in life.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's because that experience only, it has to be kind of connected across. Regine, go ahead.
Uh, a lot of my early experience in the church, I was jumping right to John 3:16,
Yeah.
which at least the translation we were using, it puts pretty much all of it on belief, which is kind of a fuzzy thing right now. But belief in it. So in context, I appreciate what your thesis is, what you're saying about becoming part of God. But yeah, I'm so yeah, I appreciate that. The jumping right to John 3:16 doesn't doesn't have behavioral implications as far as I know. I'm just observing that. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's talk about John. Go ahead, Gary, first.
Yeah, I think what you'll have to say is probably more profound, but I'll start off. In class, when I was teaching as a nurse, I would brought up the analogy of the chair and say, I know, like you can tell that I believe in the integrity of this chair because I'm sitting in it. And so I could say that I'm believing in chairs all day long, but if I'm not sitting in them, I'm not really showing you that I have a belief or a faith in chairs. And when we talk about faith in the Bible, whether it's faith in God or faith in chairs or faith in anything, it implies action. And so that's something that gets missed when people talk about John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Well, the content of that word faith, of that belief right there in John 3:16 isn't really explored in that verse. It's, you have to kind of like have a more expansive view of the entire gospel to understand what's taking place. But beyond that, the word faith or to believe has in it is implied a certain action. And the action and the experience in the Gospel of John are all implied in belief. Um, I would go so far as to say that in the Gospel of John, sin is considered unbelief. If you actually believe in God, then you're going to, if you believe that Jesus is the presence of God, then there's a lifestyle that flows from it. And so it even views like, your sin and your falling away is a lack of belief. It's a failure to believe, that God is there keeping his promises. But with that said, I'll defer to Shikant. But I was just, what I'm getting at is that we're back to that ontological separation or that unity, that faith and works, faith in the experience of God in the Gospel of John, they're all unified. And that they can't be teased out. You can't just say the Jesus prayer, the sinner's
Yeah.
prayer, whatever it is, and then say, okay, now I have faith. Now I'm a Christian. That would be incomprehensible, in the context there in the Gospel of John. Does that clarify
Culturally,
anything?
yeah, culturally, I think the Billy Graham Crusades have a bit to answer for because that was all about professing belief. And I don't recall a whole lot after that. But so I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. Yeah.
Wonderful. See, I think what has happened is that, like, we've kind of lost touch with the original meaning of these things. And many times you have to go back to the original Greek in order to see what these things mean. Because for each of these, everything, every word here, our modern interpretation is very different than the original interpretation. So um, this is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay. Now, firstly, the word believe is in Greek, it is pistevo. Pistevo really means to hold. If the best way to understand belief in the New Testament is to read the Declaration of Independence. Okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay. You're holding with your mind, you're holding with your heart, you're holding with your body. Okay, it's an act that includes all these three things, just like in the Declaration of Independence. And it ends the declaration, and then, so that's the start of the Declaration of Independence, right? So it's the same word. It's like that word, hold, believe, pistevo. That's what it is. So it combines. We have kind of in modern times, belief is used much more superficially. If you look at the word belief in Old English, it has the same root as the word love. Okay, so you actually love. So that is also included in that. And just like the Declaration of Independence ends, that to this we pledge our lives, our sacred, all our wealth and our sacred honor. So it's all of that is combined. And that is the foundation. That holding of that declaration is the foundation of America. So similarly, holding of this is the foundation. And what is it that you're holding? He's saying, believe in the Son. Many, in John, John 1, we heard those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, right? The name there, again, we have completely misinterpreted what name is. It is interpreted as saying you just say the name of Jesus. No. Actually, the name, the original word is onoma. Onoma means character. It means nature. So you you hold the character of Jesus, or you attach yourself to the nature of Jesus. Okay. And what is the nature of Jesus? Right? He is human. So he's very much accessible, or is somebody you can imitate, some like an elder brother that you can look at, see what he's doing, and you can imitate. At the same time, he's God. So he's contained within him is who God the Father is. So you're acting in accordance with that. So when it says, and again, it's connected to, the first part, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So it's showing you what the love is. The word love there is agape. Agape is this self-sacrificial love, where Father is pouring out everything into the Son. Actually, Father is pouring out everything into the world, into us, through the Son. And that is his character. And he says, if you have that character, and if you hold to that character in yourself, both for God and for others, then you have what they're saying is everlasting life. Everlasting life here is simply resurrection. It's your ability to continuously regenerate yourself. Because otherwise we get ossified, we become full of ourselves. We don't hear other people. this is being open to the world so that you can continuously learn, continuously destroy your old man and create new. And all of that is kind of in this. Ruchin, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Getting much clearer to myself about where the church has fallen and its effect on me, people like me. Yeah, because that's beautiful, way more beautiful than, profess this fairly simple thing and then go on and do what you want.
Right. Because then that's kind of almost, that's pretense. So
Yeah,
it's not, I kind of hesitate to call it a church because
what?
church,
Yeah,
actually, again, the word church that we use in the New Testament, the original word is ecclesia, which means assembly.
yeah.
And two or three,
Not just a social club.
right, exactly. So so that is lost. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Jeannie, go
Mhm.
ahead. Jeannie, go ahead. You're on mute.
Think of faith a bit like a compass, so that you can consider that if you want to be like Jesus, maybe you're not starting from the exact same spot, but you're pointing in the same direction.
Yes.
And that kind of can become an operative goal. I think you're very hard on these people, Gary. I think actually faith, the whole idea behind faith is that you're going to do this and it's going to make you better. I mean, that's the idea, isn't it? And so by starting with the doing of it, saying the prayer, whatever, you are I mean, please, these people are pretty much the same as everybody else. And I think we all have these failings that, as you've admitted, we're blind to. I think that the faith part means that we're trying to join this together. And I think part of the failing maybe is not so much, as individuals, because perhaps as individuals, we're all going to fail. But as a group, I think we're sort of lurching into the future and trying to make things better. And I really think, hey, you've got these people that are actually going to church. I mean, they're doing something. They're starting somewhere. They're joining together. They're trying to align themselves. Please, these are your allies, not your enemy. And I mean, the church has failed all along. Certainly, there's been a lot of failure, and to expect it to be different now, but as a group, I think, in the faith part, it's a hope and a kind of a direction, towards something that's better, I hope. Well, there I go, I hope. Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate that. And I really like, yeah, how you said that maybe I'm being a little too hard on these people, especially in light of our conversation with Regine. Um, and I think that I guess that's where what I'm hoping the appeal would be is that, the people who have entered the church, maybe at the maybe they've said the prayer, but they're showing up for church and they're there. They're looking for, the questions, what does it really mean to be like Jesus? And I guess that's where I'm trying to like what Shrikant was saying, is from the bottom up, say, okay, this is what it means to be like Jesus. And I'm certainly not doing a project that's, entirely just supposed to be poo-poo and bad. That's why we're beginning with the idea of theosis. Um, and that some of that other stuff kind of needs to be there just to show the contrast of, the trappings that are there for all of us. But like I said, is like just about everybody who takes on the name of Christian, no matter what their, level of faith is, or how new they are, is we kind of get the idea that to be like Jesus is what it means to be a Christian. And so I guess that's at some point the clarity that I'm hoping to bring, which I'm also still hashing over it. And so like this group is really good for me because it's helping me to rethink the way I think about it too. Because yeah, I certainly don't have it all figured out myself. I spent a lot of time, studying it. And it really just made me more confused for quite a while. And so I'm still trying to reassemble my thoughts. But thank you again, Janine.
Jeannie, go ahead.
I wanted to mention the Martin Luther quote, I may not get there myself, and I think I probably won't, but, by helping the next people, somebody is going to get to the promised land and we'll be able to make this into a nice place to live.
No, absolutely. Jeannie, that's a great, great way of thinking, because the thing is, if you think that you know more something about Jesus, then you have to bring people to him, or you have to bring him to them. There are people who are kind of genuinely seeking. They, they are where they are. And if you think you're a little bit closer to him than them, then you have to help them. If you find that they are a little bit closer, and the thing is, it's not just one direction. He's infinite and we are finite. So you will find that there are people who are very, very simple people, and they will teach you things that you can't even imagine. Okay, very profound things, because that's again the part of lesson from John 13. John 13 is not just that you are going to pour yourself out into others, but everybody is doing that. So actually you are not only you are giving what little you can, but you're receiving from many people, and you're receiving Christ through them, because that's the medium. They are in the image of God. They are children of God. And no matter how mistaken or whatever it is that they're doing, they're still children of God. So absolutely, I really like your points very much. All right. So Gary, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody. And have a good night.
You
All right.
do have
All right.
one more.
Yes,
I
please.
think it's a quick question.
Go ahead.
At various points in my searching and somewhat confusion, although I'm past the crisis, I've been interested in the red letter Christians. I'm just curious if Gary has anything to say about that in terms of being like Christ, the people who want to follow. I don't know how reputable it is, but like the Gospels that have what we're most confident Jesus really said in red letters. It's certainly a place to start by being like Jesus, but
I don't have a whole lot of direct experience with red letter Christians. Some of what I know about them, actually, what I first is heard from their critiques, from the people that criticize them. But lots of times, what I do know about them is they're trying to like reclaim Christianity from this political sphere, where it really seems like it's gone askew. And so they're like, can we just get back to the words of Jesus and trying to live there. And so without having gotten, knowing too much about it, I would say I'm very sympathetic for it. And there's certainly very much where that's exactly what we're doing here with this project, and especially in building it out of the Gospel of John. Because like the Gospel of John is so declarative of Jesus' character and what he's like. And this whole idea of us emulating that same character in ourselves. So yeah, I'm really sympathetic towards them, but I don't know enough to really lay down. But yeah, it's red letter Christianity, as I understand, is like an attempt to kind of like reclaim it from some of its left
Yeah, that's
behind
kind of,
evangelical stuff. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the impression I got. And then other things happened. I think it was Quakers who referred me to them because
Oh,
there are no Quakers where I live, but there are no red letter Christians either. It's a small, very small city. Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I hadn't thought of them that way.
Yeah.
Eugene, what city do you live in? Regine? Oh, maybe she can't hear. Okay. So, all right, folks. So great meetup, Gary. I think this is
All right.
going pretty well. What's the topic from next time?
Next time is the discussion of ethics. That was the one chapter. I can't remember what Paul was saying. I was like, oh, it's probably going to be the most boring. And he's like, oh, it's the most important. But
Okay.
yeah, it's on ethics and ethical systems.
Okay. Sounds good. So just send me the title.
I
as
will.
soon as possible, so I can go ahead and announce it. Otherwise,
Oh.
Meetup just automatically announces things.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.